They all laughed, until the engine started smoking. The Billionaire's pilot yelled, scrambling to shut it down. Crew members shouted over the alarms and emergency lights flared red on the runway. But in the middle of the chaos she stood still. A black woman in oil-stained coveralls, hair tied back, a wrench in one hand and a fire extinguisher in the other. "You're 3 seconds away from a fireball," she said, her voice calm but absolute. They ignored her until they couldn't. Because the moment she reached under the wing, yanked out a broken fuse clamp, and held it high for all to see, the entire operation came to a dead halt. No one knew her name. But that woman, dismissed just moments before as a nobody, had just saved the life of a man worth $9.6 billion, and everyone knew it. The Billionaire's name was Grayson Callahan. Tech empire builder. Jet setter. Featured on every Forbes list for the past decade. His private jet was moments away from takeoff when the alert sounded. A sensor glitch, they thought. A maintenance delay, they called it. But nobody thought to ask the woman crouched under the wing an hour earlier, the one who was told, "Clean around the plane, not under it." Her name was Jayla Monroe. She wasn't on the manifest. She wasn't supposed to speak. But when no one listened, she spoke anyway. Because she'd been in that exact moment before. Only last time her brother had died. Before all this, Jayla had been a rising star at MIT. Full scholarship. Aerospace engineering prodigy. One of her professors called her, the girl who could talk to engines. But the higher she climbed, the more doors closed. Not because she wasn't good, but because she saw too much. Her senior year, she uncovered irregularities in a prototype funding report. Millions missing, safety corners cut. She did the right thing. She reported it. What came next was silence. Then a hearing. Then expulsion. Her academic record was flagged for ethical violations. She went from being a future NASA recruit to a jobless dropout overnight. With nowhere to turn, Jayla moved back home, took odd jobs in regional airports, and scraped together hours fixing Cessnas and crop dusters. She earned just enough to survive and send half her paycheck to her mother, who was battling cancer. But she never stopped working. Never stopped learning. At night, she read aircraft manuals and FAA updates. She filed patent paperwork on napkins, and tuned small engines with surgical precision. She didn't have a license. Didn't have a platform. But she had something most engineers didn't, raw instinct. She didn't guess. She knew. On the day of the incident, Jayla was working a temporary cleaning contract at Whitehawk International, one of the most elite private airfields in the country. Billionaires flew in without customs. Celebrities exited their jets like gods on stairs. And workers like Jayla were told to stay invisible. But that morning she noticed a vibration, barely perceptible but familiar. A rumble from the undercarriage of Grayson Callahan's Gulfstream G800. It was a pattern she had seen before in the weeks before her brother's plane went down. She knelt near the tire well. Listened. Tap. And felt the tension in the engine mount. Something was wrong. She radioed it in. Her supervisor laughed. "You think you're a mechanic now?" he sneered. "You're paid to clean, not critique billionaires' jets." Jayla walked away. But she didn't leave. She circled the plane. Waited until the prep crew opened the bay. She slipped inside while they weren't looking and scanned the parts. There it was, the clamp. Fractured, barely holding. The same type her brother's crash report mentioned, buried in fine print. Her hands trembled. This was no coincidence. By the time she returned with her tools, the pilot was powering up for taxi. Jayla didn't ask. She ran under the wing and waved. Security shouted. But she didn't stop. She yelled up to the cockpit, "Shut it down. You've got a ruptured clamp on the feed manifold. You're seconds away from losing engine pressure." That's when the warning light went red. The cockpit went silent. The crew called for a full stop. And for the first time, everyone looked at her. The fuse clamp was handed to the lead engineer. Silence fell as he inspected it. "This shouldn't be here," he said. "This isn't regulation. This is aftermarket junk." Grayson Callahan stepped down from the jet, confused, annoyed. "Who is she?" he demanded. No one answered. Jayla didn't either. She was too busy wiping her hands. When they realized what she had prevented, an in-air rupture, possibly an explosion, no one could laugh anymore. Cameras started recording. Phones came out. Someone asked her name. She said nothing. Just walked away. Grayson caught up to her by the fence. "You saved my life," he said. Jayla looked at him, eyes steel. "I didn't save your life," she said. "I just fixed what your people ignored." He offered her a job. She refused. He offered her money. She turned away. "Then what do you want?" he asked. Jayla stopped. "Look back. I want the people who installed that part investigated. I want every mechanic who's been silenced heard. And I want you to stop pretending that genius only wears suits and speaks Ivy League." She dropped the broken clamp into his palm. "Here's your miracle. Now go clean up your house." That clip, her confrontation, her voice, went viral in under 24 hours. News anchors debated who she was. Engineers weighed in on the failure. FAA officials launched an internal audit. And on every screen a still image played. A woman in coveralls standing under a plane, holding a broken part like a sword. The next morning, Grayson returned to the hangar. Jayla wasn't there. Her badge had been revoked by the subcontractor who hired her. Unauthorized behavior, the paperwork said. Grayson made a call. No one answered. That night, he posted a public statement. "The woman who saved my life deserves more than gratitude. She deserves justice. I will find her." But Jayla had already moved. She wasn't waiting for praise. She was heading to the only place that still mattered to her. An abandoned warehouse once used as a flight school, where she had stored her notes, her prototype designs, and the blueprints of something the world wasn't ready for. She didn't just want to fix jets anymore. She wanted to build one, her own. And this time no one would steal it. This wasn't the end. This was just the runway. They called her the Jet Whisperer. Headlines blazed across networks. Black woman saves billionaire from runway disaster. Clips of her holding that broken clamp aired on loop. Blogs speculated. Forums debated. And in the middle of it all, Jayla Monroe disappeared. No interviews. No statements. Not a single trace. While the world was screaming her name, she was alone, walking through the rusted doors of an old aircraft hangar on the east side of town, the one place no one ever thought to search. Inside that hangar was her real life, blueprints, failed prototypes, and a cardboard box marked JXV1. Her brother's initials. He had been her first co-pilot, her first student, her first casualty. When his plane went down, no one had been held accountable. Just like when her school expelled her, no one apologized. In that silence, Jayla had forged her own language. Engineering as protest, invention as survival. The warehouse had no heat. No internet. Just her, a soldering iron, and a vision too large for her bank account. But outside the storm was growing. FAA investigators were now looking into Callahan Aero, Grayson's jet company. The clamp Jayla had exposed? It matched 3 other failures in the past 2 years, all swept under inconclusive malfunction. The subcontractor who fired her 2 days earlier was now under audit for improper licensing and failure to report mechanical risks. And deep within that mess was a name Jayla hadn't spoken in years, Solomon Greer. He was once a guest lecturer at MIT, the head of Aerodyne Systems, the company that manufactured the exact clamp that nearly killed Grayson. Years ago, Jayla had challenged one of Greer's designs in a student paper. The next semester her scholarship was re-evaluated, and her access to the lab was revoked. She'd been warned, quietly behind closed doors, to stay in her lane. Now Greer was chair of the FAA Safety Board. Jayla's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it go. Then another. Then another. Finally she picked up. "Jayla Monroe?" the voice asked. "This is Grayson Callahan. I've been trying to reach you." She didn't answer. "Look, I know you don't want to be found. But you were right. And it's worse than we thought." She stayed silent. "They're trying to bury this," he said. "They sent lawyers. Threats. They even offered me a settlement if I stopped talking." Jayla sighed. "Of course they did," she whispered. "Because that part wasn't just defective. It was illegal." Grayson paused. "Illegal?" She explained. The clamp wasn't just poorly made. It was counterfeit, an unauthorized knockoff of a part she had once designed herself, during an MIT research grant before she was expelled. Her original blueprint had been filed through the university's innovation lab, which had mysteriously dropped her name before licensing it. Aerodyne had mass-produced a cheaper version, and now it was quietly installed in over 200 jets. Grayson was stunned. "Wait, you're saying they stole your design and then used it to almost kill me?" Jayla replied coldly, "I'm saying it's not just about you." That night she sent him a file. It was 486 pages long. Emails, memos, specs, diagrams. She had compiled it over years, slowly in secret, with no platform and no allies. But she had one more piece, the prototype part, the real one, the one that worked. She had built it by hand and tucked it away for a day like this. Grayson read every page. Then he asked a question she never expected. "Can I help?" She laughed bitterly. "Help? You're part of the machine." He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "Then let me break it from the inside." Within hours, Grayson sent her a file of his own. Internal correspondence from Aerodyne. A cache of unredacted inspection reports that never made it to the FAA. And at the bottom, an invoice proving that Solomon Greer personally approved a shipment of the defective clamps to Callahan Aero's fleet 2 months ago. Jayla stared at the screen. Her hands shook. She knew what came next. The next morning, Jayla walked straight into an FAA board meeting uninvited. A live session was in progress. Bureaucrats in suits, sipping coffee, discussing vague safety protocols. She didn't wait. She slammed a duffel bag on the table and pulled out the prototype part. "This is what should have been used," she said. "This is what they stole. And this," she threw down the broken clamp, "is what almost killed a man." They stared. Some gawked. One whispered, "Get security." Jayla ignored them. "Solomon Greer authorized this. You buried the failures. You approved the flights. My brother died in a crash you called mechanical fatigue. That fatigue has a name. And it's sitting in this room." Gasp spread. The chairman slammed his gavel. "Miss Monroe, you are not authorized." "I don't need authorization," she snapped. "I need accountability." Security came. But before they could escort her out, one board member raised a hand. "Let her speak," she said. "I've seen that part before. And she's right." It was a crack in the armor. A small one, but enough. By that night, media outlets were already picking up the confrontation. A hidden cell phone video showed her voice shaking but never breaking. A retired inspector came forward to confirm her findings. And Grayson? He publicly suspended all jets equipped with Aerodyne parts. Jayla became a lightning rod. Hated, praised, attacked, invited. A dozen news programs called her a mechanic genius. But she didn't care about fame. She had a bigger plan. The stolen blueprint, the silenced deaths, the fake approvals, they were pieces of a puzzle. And she needed someone else to see it. So she knocked on the last door she ever wanted to revisit. The Department of Transportation. The receptionist blinked. "Do you have an appointment?" Jayla placed the prototype and the invoice on the counter. "No," she said. "But I've got evidence of a billion-dollar aviation cover-up. And if you turn me away, the next plane that falls from the sky will be on you." 30 minutes later, she was in a conference room with a federal investigator. She told them everything. She didn't flinch. And as the chapter closed that night, somewhere across the ocean, a fleet of jets was grounded mid-air, redirected back to the hangar, not by orders from a CO, but because a woman with no title, no license, and no privilege had stood up and said, "Enough." The arrest warrant came faster than she expected. Not for her, yet, but for the man whose signature appeared on every fraudulent invoice. Solomon Greer, chairman of Aerodyne Systems, FAA Safety Board insider. A man who hadn't answered to anyone in 20 years. When agents arrived at his home, cameras rolled. Greer smiled, confident, smug. "This is political," he said. Some disgruntled mechanic looking for attention. But the evidence spoke louder. And behind every page, every photo, every schematic, was the woman he once tried to erase, Jayla Monroe. She didn't celebrate. didn't even smile. Because she knew this wasn't justice. Not yet. The arrest of one man didn't explain how an entire system let this happen. How defective parts landed in jets flown by heads of state. How an engineer's silence was worth more than a human life. And how someone like her, black, brilliant, buried, had to nearly cause an international crisis just to be heard. That morning, Jayla received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. It was Grayson. "I'm on my way to testify," he said. "But I need to ask you something before I go." "What? Do you want in?" She paused. "In what?" "My legal team is stepping back. Too much conflict of interest. I want you to lead the briefing to the Department of Justice." Jayla nearly dropped the phone. "I'm not even licensed." Grayson's voice was calm. "You've built more credible cases than anyone I've hired." She took a breath. "Send me everything." And he did. What followed were 10 days of sleepless nights, parsing emails, redlining flight manifests, tracking down mechanics, whistleblowers, and former engineers who had walked away after being told to keep quiet. Jayla discovered a trail of cover-ups dating back almost a decade. A supply chain that funneled counterfeit parts through shell vendors. Dozens of maintenance reports rewritten by anonymous third parties. Planes that were grounded, only to be flown again after a checkmark was forged on a clipboard. And it all led back to one contract. The 2015 Defense Transport Partnership between Aerodyne and Callahan Aero, signed, ironically, at a government gala where Jayla once worked. Coat check. She didn't sleep. Didn't eat. Just worked. Because now she wasn't just fighting for her name. She was fighting for her brother. For every family who had lost someone to aviation errors. For every black woman who was told to clean the floor, not rewrite the blueprint. The hearing was set for Tuesday morning. The night before, Grayson met her in the rain outside a closed terminal. No press. No cameras. Just two people with too much history between them and too little trust. He handed her a folder. Inside were internal emails from a former board member, proving that Aerodyne executives had knowingly increased failure tolerance to meet mass production quotas. It was the smoking gun. Jayla looked up. "Why are you really doing this?" Grayson didn't flinch. "Because when you stopped my jet on that runway, you saved more than my life. You saved whatever piece of me still believed in doing the right thing." She nodded. For the first time, she believed him. The next morning, she stepped into the Justice Department chambers wearing the same coveralls she wore on the tarmac. A symbolic choice. Cameras flashed. Lawyers whispered. One whispered, "Is this a joke?" But when Jayla opened her mouth and began her presentation, no one was laughing. She spoke in precise, steady rhythms. Every claim backed by documentation. Every risk outlined with technical clarity. She explained how a forged part was stamped legitimate using a stolen algorithm. How calibration reports were duplicated using AI to avoid suspicion. How whistleblowers were paid off, reassigned, or, like her, silenced through academic sabotage. Then she brought out a small black box. "This," she said, "is my brother's flight recorder. I recovered it last year. And tonight, I want you to hear what no one ever let me say in court." She pressed play. The room went still. Her brother's voice filled the chamber, calm at first, then panicked. Engine vibration, no response. Losing pressure. No override. Requesting emergency descent. Repeat, clamp instability. "This isn't a pilot error. This is a part failure." The tape ended in static. Jayla wiped her eyes but didn't break. That plane was signed off by Aerodyne, using the exact same forged part that nearly killed Mr. Callahan. This is not a one-time oversight. This is murder by inaction. A long silence. Then a voice from the bench. "What do you want us to do?" Jayla looked up. "I want you to ground every plane carrying this part. I want Solomon Greer tried in federal court. And I want Aerodyne's government contracts revoked until every piece of that chain is rebuilt with actual safety, not silence." The board took recess. Cameras followed her down the hall. One reporter asked, "Ms. Monroe, what would justice look like to you right now?" She stopped. Justice would look like no more funerals. That night, a motion was passed. Every aircraft using the defective part was grounded. Aerodyne's contracts were frozen pending investigation. Solomon Greer was denied bail. And for the first time in 10 years, Jayla Monroe walked home knowing her brother's death wasn't just a memory, it was a turning point. Back at her hangar, she found a package. Inside was a new prototype schematic. And a note from Grayson. I'm shutting down Callahan Aero. But I don't want to walk away. I want to invest in something better. I want to build your jet. If you'll let me. Jayla stared at the page. It was her design JX-V1, only improved. She smiled softly. It wasn't over. Not yet. Room only. Cameras flashed. Reporters elbowed each other for a better view. Defense contractors, regulators, and lobbyists lined the back wall in suits so crisp they looked ironed into place. But at the center of it all, beneath the golden seal of the United States Court of Federal Claims, stood a woman in gray coveralls and steel-toed boots, holding a thumb drive and a battered flight manual. Her name was no longer just whispered. It was printed on every front page. Jayla Monroe, the mechanic who grounded a billion-dollar empire. She didn't come to speak for herself. She came to speak for the dead. The judge adjusted his glasses. Ms. Monroe, you are not a licensed attorney or certified expert in avionics as per federal protocol. Jayla didn't flinch. But I am the only person in this room who found the truth when everyone else was paid to look away. A murmur ran through the crowd. Grayson Callahan sat 2 rows behind her, silent, surrounded by no one. Since shuttering Callahan Aero, he had become something between a whistleblower and a pariah. Investors fled. Board members sued. But he never once tried to shift the blame. When Jayla had asked him why, he simply said, I built a kingdom on bad steel. I want to leave behind something worth more than money. Today was the reckoning. The prosecution presented its case first: emails, procurement orders, and internal audit failures. They laid bare how Aerodyne knowingly distributed substandard parts, forged compliance data, and created shell companies to disguise origin. Solomon Greer, once untouchable, sat in silence. He wore a blue suit. No tie. No smirk. Just cold calculation in his eyes. His lawyers argued Jayla's evidence was circumstantial. Her background, unreliable. Her methods, improper. One attorney even called her a glorified YouTuber with a wrench. But then the judge gave her the floor. Jayla walked to the witness stand, not with notes, not with papers, but with a piece of twisted metal in her hand. The broken clamp. I want you to look at this, she said, holding it up. This part was installed in over 200 jets. It was certified using forged documentation. And it was sold using a patent I wrote in college, without my name on it. She dropped it on the table with a sharp clang. This isn't just a defect. This is deliberate engineering fraud. Signed off by Solomon Greer and sanctioned by silence. She plugged the thumb drive into the court's display system. Blueprints appeared on screen. Time-stamped approvals. A side-by-side of her original prototype and the altered version used by Aerodyne. Then came the messages, internal memos with Greer's initials approving rushed testing. One email even read, if it flies it sells. No one checks the clamps. The room went still. Jayla stepped closer to the jury. They thought no one would ever notice. That nobody like me, black, broke, buried under bills, would ever speak loud enough to matter. But you know what's louder than money? She pressed play on the last audio clip. It was her brother's voice again. I'm not gonna make it, he said over static. Tell Jayla I love her. Tell her she was right. A woman in the jury cried. One man took off his glasses. Jayla's voice trembled, but she didn't stop. I wasn't supposed to hear that. I had to fight for years just to recover the file. But I play it every time I'm about to give up. Because it reminds me who I'm fighting for. The judge leaned forward. What is your request, Ms. Monroe? Jayla looked him straight in the eye. Permanent revocation of Aerodyne's FAA licenses. Prosecution of Solomon Greer for engineering fraud and negligent homicide. And the creation of a public whistleblower fund for unaffiliated engineers like me, who see problems before they become disasters. The room exploded in applause. The gavel pounded. Order. 3 days later, the court ruled in her favor. Aerodyne's licenses were revoked. Greer was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Jayla Monroe was offered a permanent seat on the Independent Federal Aviation Review Board. She turned it down. Instead, she returned to the hangar, her hangar, with a new name over the door, JX Institute for Aviation Justice. It wasn't just a school. It was a revolution. A training ground for women, for the ignored, for the unseen minds like hers that were told they didn't belong in the sky. Grayson came to visit months later. Quiet. No camera crew. Just him, a box in hand. "I brought you something," he said. Inside was a model jet, painted black and cobalt blue, with her initials etched in chrome, JM. She smiled. "You really trying to impress me with a toy plane?" He chuckled. "No. I'm trying to say, maybe this time we build it together. From scratch. No shortcuts." Jayla raised an eyebrow. "You applying for a job, Mr. Callahan?" He smiled. "Only if you promise not to fire me when I ask too many questions." She paused. "I'll hire you on one condition." "What's that?" "Pass my math test first. And wash your hands. My lab's clean." They both laughed. But there was one more moment left. At the top of the courtroom where it all started, Courtroom B17, there now hangs a plaque. Bronze. Cling. Heavy with truth. It reads, "This is not a part failure. This is a system failure. And I will fix it. Jayla Monroe." Because sometimes the hero doesn't wear a cape. She wears coveralls. And carries a wrench like a sword.